encouragement, as I said earlier.
And you'll see where that fits in a moment. Because I want to talk about someone in the Bible called Joseph. A guy who made a massive difference to many people and really changed history, church history. But if I was to ask you to guess who he was, you'd probably get it wrong. Why? Because this Joseph was actually known by another name. And his name was Barnabas. Barnabas. And there's a good reason why Joseph became known as Barnabas, and we'll look at that in a minute. But there are also other reasons why he got that name and why he stood out from others and made such a difference. And we're going to look at a few of them this morning, just 5. So very quickly, here's the first one. And this is what made the biggest impact on Barnabas getting this name. Because the first thing we learn about Barnabas is his spirit of generosity. Barnabas comes onto the scene in Acts chapter 4. And it records that, this is a guy who's recently come to Christ. And in having an encounter with a living God, it affects his life. It changes him. And that's what an encounter with God should do. If it doesn't change your life and how you live, you've got to question whether you've really had an encounter. Because it says he sold a field and gave the money away to the disciples. Because he wanted to help others. He sells the field, he goes to the leaders of the church and says, there you go, do with it what you will. Do with it what you will. Because what he's saying there is not just, look, I'm behind you in words. He's like, no, I mean it. I support you. I believe in what you're doing and what God's called you to do. There you go. Take that. And that was how Barnabas lived. As I said earlier, that wasn't his real name. That was a nickname. His name was Joseph. But Barnabas means son of encouragement. But he got that name because of his generosity. He was always giving financially, in time, and in love. And because he was sowing into people and into ministry in such a way all the time, he became known as an encourager, not just in word, but practically. He committed himself to encouraging others and making a difference. And to use a modern phrase, putting his money where his mouth is. So he became known as the encourager, Barnabas, son of encouragement. It made me think, what name do people call me? Or you? Now, your enemies will always have a name for you that's perhaps not so nice. But wider than that, what do people say about you and me? Think about that, because that's an interesting one, isn't it? Now, Barnabas' generosity, we know, was not a one-off. It was a big part of his character, his heart, and that's the way he chose to live. And he did that because Barnabas believed that having that spirit of generosity was really important. Really important. And you can see that, and it is important because the opposite of generosity is selfishness. And selfish people tend to be, when you dig down, it's because they're threatened. They feel threatened. Selfish people are threatened people. And threatened people tend to protect and hoard, not just their possessions, but they also hold tightly onto their prestige, the power that they have, and any preferences. In other words, they like what they like and people need to fit in with them rather than the other way around. Sum it up, they like to be in control. And also with selfish people, if someone else gains, they see it as them losing. Oh, look at them, it's not fair that they get that and they get that and we get nothing. And that's selfishness. If someone else gains, they see it as their loss. And naturally, if you're like that, you don't like anybody else winning. But the problem is this: an ungenerous or selfish heart, be that in attitude as well as practice, if you allow that to remain in you, it will always sabotage healthy growth within the church and the kingdom of God. Why? Because it's selfishness at heart. And when there is selfishness, you can't have unity. Because for me, unity speaks of teamwork, whereas selfishness is individuality. It's also the opposite to Christ-likeness, as it puts yourself first and others second. And one of the most powerful ways to break that stranglehold of a selfish and ungenerous heart is the discipline of generosity. Why discipline? Because it's something we have to practice. Let's be honest, we won't always feel generous. But it's a bit like forgiveness. Forgiveness is a command. Generosity is something we have to practice as well. Because some are better at it than others, but there'll be times when we don't feel like being generous. Especially if we think the person that God's telling us to be generous to doesn't deserve it. But that's not the point. It's building up that pattern, that discipline of generosity. And if we do that, it puts our treasures and our priorities in the right place and helps keep them there. Check out Matthew chapter 6, verses 19 to 24. I'm not going to look at it now, but the little passage, store up your treasures in heaven, not on earth, where they're going to be wasted away. Do you know, the first step to building a great team is not found in developing better people skills. They're very important. But it's this. It's found in developing a heart of generosity. And church is about team, not about one person, individual up the front, be they male or female. Church is about team. We're in this together. We're called for a purpose. And you can apply that everywhere, not just church, but in every area of life. If you develop a heart of generosity in people, remember, generosity is giving of time, not just finance. You know, you'll see people with a generous heart who are willing to serve and willing to make sacrifices and willing to volunteer and willing to go the extra mile. Why? Because they've got a generous heart. And they want to give out the blessing that they've got. You know, God's blessed me, therefore I want to bless others. And you begin to live differently. Second one was this about Barnabas. He was quick to forgive people when others wouldn't. He had a readiness to forgive. And we see this because the next time Barnabas appears in the book of Acts, after chapter 4, we read that he's now supporting and sponsoring the ministry of a former dangerous enemy, a guy called Saul, who became known as Paul. You know, how many of us would actively and maybe even financially support somebody that's caused us a lot of damage? You know, we might even take a lot of convincing to support a friend if we're stingy. But an enemy, forget it. But this is what Barnabas is doing. See, Paul, you read the story, he had previously persecuted and imprisoned, had sent to prison some of Barnabas' closest friends. Even worse than that, we can see that he clearly collaborated in the death, the murder of Barnabas' friend Stephen. I don't know about you, but for me, that's a lot to get over and forgive. And yet Barnabas was not only willing to forgive, not only willing to look past what Paul had done, he was willing to look even further than that, to see what God was doing in Paul. And this is what allowed him to see potential in Paul where everybody else could only see past sins and failure. Well, Paul did this and Paul did that, and the damage he's caused, and you know, that guy, he should never be forgiven. And he certainly, if you're going to forgive him, okay, we're commanded to forgive, but he shouldn't be allowed, in the church and certainly not to have any position. Barnabas could see past all of that. For Barnabas, what God forgave, he forgave. And not only did he forgave quickly. How many of us we know we have to forgive, but we'll just hold on for a little bit longer, make them suffer because of the damage they did to us. Moving quickly on. If God forgave, Barnabas forgave, and he did it quickly. He didn't wait till he felt like it or felt better. He just did it. I'm pretty sure there were times when Barnabas felt that he didn't want to forgive. But he did it because God had commanded him to forgive and because he knew what forgiveness was. God had forgiven him. But ironically, that same spirit of forgiveness that benefited Paul, that Barnabas gave him, is what eventually led to a split between Barnabas and Paul. Because Barnabas wanted to forgive a guy called John Mark. And Paul didn't. Why? Because on a previous mission trip, John Mark had failed. He'd messed up badly and done a runner. So Paul was like, can't use that guy again. He's unreliable. Don't want to use him. And Barnabas is like, no, he'll be all right. He'll be okay. And there's a disagreement, and it records that they went their separate ways. But who was right? Now, Paul, the great hero of the New Testament, wrote so many letters. The guy that effectively reached us, Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, major hero. And yet, it was Barnabas that was right, not Paul. And we know this because it records that Paul asked to see John Mark shortly before his death. He asked for John Mark to come and visit him because John Mark was useful to him. In other words, Paul's about to face death and he wants somebody to come to him that's going to encourage him. Why would he ask a failure to come and encourage him? Because John Mark wasn't a failure. John Mark went on to write the first gospel. The second, if you think of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, but chronologically, age-wise, it's the first gospel. Barnabas saw that in him. Paul, at that point, could only see his failure. Barnabas, the man of encouragement, dared to believe that this guy still had something to give and contribute. And he was right. He was right. How amazing is that, that if Barnabas hadn't have done that, where would we be? Because without Paul's ministry, we may never have been reached. Now, being quick to forgive doesn't mean ignoring sin, doesn't mean that we just let people do what they want and then carry on regardless in the church, and even lead or whatever. It's not that, but it is this. It means seeing people through the same lens that God sees them. Seeing what God is doing in their life now rather than looking at what they've done in the past. Forgiveness is about setting people back on the path to restoration. Giving them another chance. Not just another chance, but actively working with them and encouraging them to achieve greatness, rather than holding them back because of what they've done. Third thing about Barnabas, he focused on a person's anointing rather than their background or their spiritual CV, whether they've been to Bible college or something. We know he's willing to forgive what God had forgiven, but he also showed great wisdom in how he saw people's potential. I believe then, and it'd be the same now, that many Christians, if we were looking at Paul now, many Christians would quickly point out that Paul was perhaps not the right person to bring into ministry. Didn't have the right skills, he was hot-headed, bad temper, character problems. He hadn't been walking with Jesus long. This is a guy that was killing Christians 5 minutes ago. He's only just been saved, if he has. All these problems. And he's not only that, he's caused tremendous amount of damage to the church in the past. we would exclude Paul from ministry. Yet somehow Barnabas was able to see past all of that and focus on the amazing things that God had done in turning Paul's life around and was doing now in Paul's life. I can relate to that. I've experienced similar battles over the years, and they've taught me a lot in seeing potential in people where other people don't always see it, or where somebody's messed up and others want to punish them or keep them in punishment. And it's like, no, just let it go and give people a chance, let them shine. And there's various reasons why, we want to keep people back and judge them. It can be because of past sin. It can be because they've failed. It could be because we think they're too young. They're not qualified enough. They're not dynamic enough in that they're up dancing around at the front. Or even just because we don't like them. There'll always be a reason why some people will question your choice to give somebody an opportunity that they feel they don't deserve. There'll always be that. But if God is saying, no, I believe in this person, regardless of age or background, who are we to argue? And I can thankfully say from experience that when we persevere and just go with what God wants and give people an opportunity, even if that opportunity is only for a season, every one of them has contributed to the life and growth of the church. Check out 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 to 31 if you're taking notes. Now, I know there needs to be wisdom in who we allow to minister and lead, but we must never forget there must always be grace. Because the fact is, you and I, every one of us, we're all learning to be more Christ-like. We're all learning. We're not perfect. Number 4, Barnabas defended the right for people to be different from the perceived normal. What's normal? There's a case in point. We're all different, but you can very easily get into like a mold of how we think people should be in church. And we like to have this, look, come as you are church, and we believe that, but we have to be careful because sometimes we can prejudge people. Barnabas was willing to defend those who were different and who did things differently. Twice he steps forward to defend the ministry to the people who weren't Jewish, the Gentiles. Now, as a Jew and a good Jew, Barnabas probably had his doubts. You can see that in Peter. Should we be doing this, God, or shouldn't we? But he overcame his doubts because of his love for people and his obedience to the Father. Jesus said, new wine needs what? New wineskins. But how many of us really believe that? Or do we even realize how quickly our new wineskins can become old wineskins? Do you know, there are many times where I've seen people, especially young people, and for me, I want to see our young people grow and speak out. Not 10 years down the road, now. In fact, my heart would be not to lead this church. As strange as that sounds. To be around, but to see others lead it. I don't know if you understand that. To see people grow and develop and give them those opportunities. And how often are people held back because of their age or some other reason, which I find saddening, really. But it can happen in leadership. People get held back because those in leadership can find it threatening. But the amazing and encouraging thing is that often those whom the world rejects are the people that God uses. And uses them to great effect to spark another great ministry. We'll never find and develop future leaders, be they young or old, because age is not the issue, if we insist on judging people by what we like rather than what God likes. Barnabas knew better. He judged what God approved by what God blessed, whether he was comfortable with it or not. Now, I'm sure there was times he was uncomfortable, but if he saw the hand of God on someone or something, then he would just give it the nod of approval. Final thing, we'll finish with this. Barnabas was a great leader, but he was a great leader who was happy to promote others above himself. Perhaps the most amazing thing about Barnabas was his willingness to step aside and take second billing. From the beginning, you read in Acts, it was Barnabas and Paul. Barnabas was the main man. Barnabas was the mentor. Paul was his apprentice, the one being mentored. Now, a little bit further on in Acts 13 and 14, it all changes. We read that Paul performs this amazing miracle and then goes on to speak a great message, an anointed message that challenges many people. And from that point on, it becomes Paul and Barnabas. Paul's the main man. There are not many people in leadership willing, never mind, being say, yeah, fine. They can go from top billing to second billing. They want that position. But from what we know about Barnabas, he didn't have a problem with it, because he understood that Jesus wasn't joking when he said that the path to greatness is found in serving others, not yourself. Path to greatness is found in serving others, not yourself. Barnabas knew that the mission is far more important than the position. The mission is far more important than the position. You can get people who are looking for position. That's a selfish attribute, and will hold back the mission. The mission is far more important than the position. If we're all about the mission, then we just want to serve. It doesn't matter what role we're in. Barnabas knew that and was willing to live that out in his life. Barnabas was more concerned about glorifying Jesus than himself. He didn't fight to protect his position or his reputation. As far as he's concerned, anything he had was a gift from God. And his passion was just to grow God's kingdom. Whatever that cost him personally, that was his passion. And he would have suffered for it, but that was his passion. But that is why God was able to use Barnabas to find, to train, and to empower some of the greatest leaders in church history. The kind of leaders that the early church desperately needed to be so successful. Also, it's the same kind of leaders we need today. As I said before, if Barnabas hadn't supported Paul, would Paul have had the impact that Paul had? Who's heard of Billy Graham? Yeah? A lot of people have heard of Billy Graham. He's reached literally millions during his lifetime. And yet without a guy called Albert McMakin, there would be no Billy Graham. Who's heard of Albert McMakin? Exactly. But Albert McMakin invited Billy Graham along to a crusade. Now, Billy Graham wasn't a Christian. Now, Albert McMakin said to him, it's all right, you don't have to go into this crusade and, be battered by the God Squad. Just drive the truck so that me and my mates can go. And he persuaded Billy Graham to do that. And he went along all week. And as the week went on, every evening, Billy Graham got a bit closer to the tent and then eventually went into it, heard the gospel and was saved. The rest is history. But without Albert McMakin, it wouldn't have happened. Without Barnabas, we wouldn't have the Paul that reached us, the apostle to the Gentiles. The Barnabas factor is a powerful reminder that true greatness isn't found in how large our congregation is or how many people we have under us that report to us or help us or volunteer for us. It's this. How many people do we serve? How many people are we willing to let stand on our shoulders so that they can see more than we can see and do more than we have done? Are we willing to push people above us, to give them an opportunity, even when others think they're failures? Especially our young folk. You know, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, that you guys have a major part to play in the growth of this church now, not just the future. And I'm going to do everything I can to release that and make it happen. Can I encourage you, church? We'll just finish with prayer because we're over time, and please hang around for refreshments. As I said at the beginning, if anybody should be people of encouragement, it's us. Would you agree or disagree? You know, we're in a world where we're going to get constant discouragement, be it for health reasons, financial reasons, or just because some people are a pain in the backside. And it happens. But let's not be like them. Let's be different. Let us be the encouragers. It's easy to encourage somebody you like, but the challenge, as with Barnabas, how about encouraging the people that you don't like? The people that have done you harm. Because to do that, the message that sends to the world is, our God is different. We don't live the way the world lives. We live differently. And we can love because He first loved us. So I don't have to wait. You know, if Duncan's caused me a lot of damage, I don't have to wait for Duncan to say sorry or repent. I can love Duncan because I've been first loved by Jesus. Do you understand that? So it's not dependent on what Duncan does. It all depends on what God did for me. And vice versa. I can't withhold what I've been given. Can I encourage you? Let's live out the love we've received from Christ. Let's not wait to receive that love from others. Let's be givers. Let's be encouragers. And if we do that, tell you what, we'll impact this community. We'll impact this community for His sake. It's up to you. Do you accept the challenge to be an encourager rather than a discourager? Well, the choice is yours. I pray you'll be an encourager. Have a great week. If you don't have to look